The wind cut across the mountains like a knife, fine needles of snow slicing through the gray air. Eleanor Ellie Whitaker, 67 years old, and steady as a seasoned ranger could be, stepped down from the gondola platform onto the packed snow of Glacier National Park. The boards beneath her boots creaked faintly under the weight of ice. Above her, the peaks were swallowed in clouds, their shapes only guessed at massive white phantoms lurking in the mist. Ellie adjusted the strap of her weathered pack, the one she'd used for years of rescue work, and started toward the lodge. Her joints ached in the cold, but her stride carried purpose. She was here for one reason, and one reason only. 3 weeks ago, her son Daniel, his wife Rachel, and their twin daughters, Ivy and Wren, had vanished somewhere in these mountains. The official line was a hiking accident, perhaps disorientation, in sudden bad weather, but the official line never satisfied Ellie. Daniel had grown up in these very peaks. She had taught him how to read a storm in the clouds, how to choose the safer ridge when the sky darkened, how to keep himself and others alive out here. If they weren't back, it wasn't because of a mistake. Something else had happened, inside the lodge. The warmth hit her like a wall. Tom, the clerk at the desk, looked up and his face softened. "Miss Whitaker, back again." Ellie nodded. "Any news?" Tom shook his head, the weight of the answer heavy between them. She unzipped her coat and pulled from her pack a neat stack of missing person flyers. Daniel's smile printed above Rachel's, the twins in front wearing their bright yellow and lavender jackets. Those colors had always made them easy to spot on the trail. "I'm replacing the old ones. These'll go up on the main boards and trailheads?" "Of course," Tom said. "The manager already said anything you need. Just ask." Ellie moved through the hall, tacking the flyers up, her gloved hands smoothing each one against cork and wood. The last time she'd seen them, a photo message from Daniel just hours before they were reported missing, they'd been standing in front of their favorite overlook, the same backdrop they always used. Rachel had once said she wanted to make a time-lapse over the years. The thought twisted something in Ellie's chest. That overlook should have been a memory marker for their family. It was just the last proof of life. The rest of the day blurred into conversations with hikers, hopeful eyes, sympathetic shakes of the head, and the biting wind off the ridges. Until, halfway up the main trail, a man in camouflage and an orange vest approached. "Mind if I take one of those flyers?" She handed him one. "Cal Jennings," he said, offering a gloved hand. "Been hunting up here 30 years. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "You're Ellie Whitaker, ranger legend." She gave him a tight smile. "Used to be. Now I'm just a grandmother looking for her family." He studied the flyer again, then reached into his jacket for a small trail camera device. "I've got cameras set up to watch for game. Might be worth checking something." Ellie's pulse quickened as he scrolled through footage. The snow hissed against the trees while she waited. Finally, he froze the image. 3 figures moved across the misty frame. A woman in a coral jacket and 2 small children, yellow and lavender, picking their way through the underbrush. Ellie's breath caught. "That's Rachel. That's Ivy and Wren." The date stamp read 3 days ago. Her knees went weak. "They're alive." Ellie's eyes locked on the tiny screen, drinking in every blurred detail. Rachel was turned slightly, one arm extended toward the twins as if shepherding them along. Even through the haze of the camera's resolution, the girl's jacket seemed too clean, too dry, for people lost in the mountains for nearly a month. They didn't look like they had been surviving on scraps or huddling under makeshift shelters. They looked purposeful. But there was no sign of Daniel. Cal tapped the GPS overlay. "This was taken here," he said, pointing to a remote section of the map. "Northridge, deep in the backcountry. 8 miles from here as the crow flies. No marked trails. Avalanche risk after last week's storms." Ellie stared at the location. "The search teams never went that far north." "They wouldn't," Cal said. "Not with kids in the mix, too dangerous. Unless someone wanted to stay hidden." Ellie murmured. Cal didn't reply. But his silence was an answer in itself. "I need a copy of this footage," she said firmly. He nodded and transferred the file to her phone. "Call me if you need anything. I know that section like the back of my hand." By the time she returned to the lodge, dusk was already sliding down the slopes. She called Detective Marshall, the lead on the case, and sent him the footage. "This does look like your daughter-in-law and the girls," Marshall admitted. "But it's too late in the day to mount a search. We'll assemble teams at first light." Ellie's hands tightened on the phone. "They're alive, Marshall. 3 days ago. Every hour matters." "I know," he said. "But you also know night searches in that terrain are a death sentence." He wasn't wrong. She had been on to many of those searches herself, sometimes finding people alive, sometimes not, but standing still until morning felt unbearable. That night, as the first flakes began to drift past the lodge windows, Ellie tried to eat dinner in the communal hall, but overheard voices stopped her appetite cold. "That's the old ranger," one man whispered. "If they were my family, I'd be out there right now. Storm be damned." The words burned. By the time she slipped back to her cabin, her decision was already made. She pulled out her best cold-weather gear, thermal layers, waterproof shell, headlamp, and packed her rescue kit with food, first aid supplies, and the GPS with Cal's coordinates marked. She knew she was breaking every protocol. She also knew she was the only one who might make it in time. She left under cover of darkness, skirting the main paths, snow muting her footsteps. The air was sharp in her lungs, the beam of her headlamp cutting a narrow tunnel through the white. The climb was punishing. The snow deepened with every step, the slope steepening until she was half-hauling herself by the branches she could grip. Hours passed in a blur of frozen breath and muscle ache. When her legs began to falter, a faint glow through the trees stopped her cold. A cabin. The chimney smoked, the windows spilling golden light onto the snow. In this weather, in this remote stretch of mountain, could only mean one thing. Someone was inside. Ellie approached cautiously and knocked. The door opened. And for a second her mind couldn't catch up to what her eyes saw. Rachel, her face, was pale, thinner than Ellie remembered, but her eyes, those sharp, assessing eyes, were unchanged. Inside, the twins peeked from behind a chair, its eyes wide. Ellie's heart swelled and broke at the same time. "Grandma Ellie," they whispered in unison. Rachel ushered her in, fussing about her cold hands, making powdered milk for the girls before tucking them into a shared bed in the corner. When they were settled, Ellie turned to her. "Where's Daniel?" Rachel's gaze dropped. "The day after the storm, he went for help. He never came back." Ellie listened, but something in her gut twisted. Rachel's story didn't fit. The supplies in the cabin were too fresh. The woodpile by the door was stacked too high. When Ellie noticed the glint of metal under a loose floorboard, she pried it up and froze. Daniel's wedding ring? Clean, untarnished. Rachel's explanation was quick. Too quick he must have lost it that first night. Hands numb from the cold, Ellie didn't believe her. She barely had time to process the thought before something heavy slammed into the back of her skull. The world went black. When she woke, the air was thick with the chemical sting of leaking. Gas. Her wrists and ankles were bound to a chair, the fire on the hearth guttering low. The smell sharpened, and then the fire caught. Ellie rocked the chair, ignoring the stabbing pain in her head, until one leg splintered. She fished her knife from her pocket, cut the ropes, stumbled to the window. 2 swings with a firewood log shattered the glass. She climbed through as the fire roared behind her, the explosion's heat licking her back as she landed hard in the snow, somewhere out in the dark. A child's voice cried out. Ellie ran toward it, her boots sinking deep, until she found Wren. Huddled against a rock, her leg bent at a wrong angle. "Mom said she had to take Ivy," Wren sobbed. She said, "Something about a sacrifice."
Always.
Blood ran colder than the snow. She splinted Wren's leg, lifted her into her arms, and started down the mountain. She would get this child to safety if it killed her. Ellie's muscles burned with every step, but the weight of her granddaughter in her arms steadied her more than it slowed her. Wren's head rested against her shoulder, her small breaths uneven from pain. The child had stopped crying, which worried Ellie more than the sobbing had. Children fell silent when they were too exhausted or too cold to waste the energy on tears. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, brittle and sharp in the cold air. Ellie followed them like markers on an invisible map. West, always west. Toward the lodge, toward warmth and help. When the first blush of dawn seeped through the trees, she spotted the faintest thread of the main trail. Relief was a dangerous emotion in the wilderness. It could make you careless, but she allowed herself one long, slow breath before calling out, "Help! We need help here." The figures in the distance froze, then began running toward her. By the time she reached the edge of the lodge's clearing, hands were already taking Wren from her arms, voices tumbling over one another in urgent questions. "Where did you find her? She hurt? Is that one of the Whitaker twins?" Ellie ignored all of them except the most pressing. "She needs a doctor now, and call the police. Rachel tried to kill me." The words stopped the crowd cold. Then, as if a switch had flipped, the lodge erupted into motion. Staff guided Ellie and Wren inside, wrapped them in blankets, and pressed steaming mugs into their hands. A first-aid-trained hiker examined Wren's leg with careful fingers, confirming what Ellie already suspected, a clean break that needed hospital treatment. The sirens came next, winding up the valley like a wail of warning. By the time the paramedics lifted Wren onto a stretcher, Ellie's adrenaline was ebbing, leaving her legs shaky. She climbed into the helicopter beside her granddaughter, refusing to let go of her hand. That's when a uniformed officer leaned close. "Miss Whitaker, we have Rachel Whitaker in custody at the hospital. She came in earlier with a child, says it's Ivy, and she's making some serious accusations against you." Ellie's head snapped toward him. "Accusations?" Nodded. "Claims you found their shelter, became enraged when you learned Daniel was presumed dead, and tried to harm her and the children." The gall of it nearly took Ellie's breath. "She's lying. She knocked me out and left me in a cabin filling with gas. And she abandoned her own daughter to die in the snow." The officer's expression didn't change, but his pen scratched. Across a small notebook, "We'll take your full statement when we land." The hospital smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale coffee. Wren was wheeled directly to radiology while Ellie was steered toward an exam bay. The nurse clucked over the cut on her scalp and the lacerations on her hands, finally declaring she had a mild concussion and should be kept for observation. Ellie refused to be moved to another floor. "I'm staying near my granddaughter," she said, and her tone made it clear there was no room for negotiation. The door to the bay swung open again. Cal Jennings stepped inside. Ellie's first instinct was suspicion. His footage had led her to the cabin, but his sudden appearance here was too convenient. He must have read her thoughts because he said quietly, "I need to tell you and the police the truth. All of it." They found a consultation room. 2 more officers joined them. Kel's voice was steady at first, but his eyes betrayed the guilt under the words. "3 weeks ago, I found Daniel, Rachel, and the twins in my cabin. I let them stay the night. The girls were exhausted. Next morning, the weather turned worse, so I headed toward the lodge, but on the ridge, I saw Rachel push Daniel off a cliff." The words landed like a blow. Ellie's hands curled into fists on the table. "Why didn't you report it?" one officer demanded. Cal's jaw tightened. "Because Rachel saw me. She offered me money from Daniel's life insurance to keep quiet. I agreed." He dropped his gaze. "For 3 weeks, I brought them food, firewood, kept them hidden." Ellie's voice was low, but lethal. "You helped her cover up my son's murder." He nodded. "I did, until I heard her on the phone planning to pin it on me. That's when I called the police." The officers exchanged a look. "Mr. Jennings, you're under arrest as an accessory after the fact to homicide." They cuffed him and let him out. He paused in the doorway. "Doubt me. You might not have found Wren in time." Ellie didn't answer. An hour later, an officer came to her side. "We're going to arrest Rachel now. Do you want to be present?" Ellie nodded. The hospital room was guarded. Rachel lay propped up in bed, her hair clean, her hospital gown crisp. She barely blinked as the detective read her rights. When it was done, Ellie stepped forward. "Why, Rachel?" "Daniel loved you." Rachel's lip curled. "Loved me?" "Was cheating. Planning to leave me. Changing the prenup." "I wasn't going to lose everything because of him." Ellie's voice was ice. "You didn't just lose him. You lost your daughters, too." Rachel's eyes narrowed. This isn't over. It was over, Ellie said, the moment you pushed him. That evening, after Wren's surgery, Ellie was allowed into Ivy's room. The girl looked smaller somehow, her face pinched with worry. Where's Mom? Where's Wren? They're both safe, Ellie said, careful with her words. And you'll be with me now. Ivy's eyes shimmered. Daddy's not coming back. Is he? Ellie gathered her close. No, sweetheart. But he loved you and your sister more than anything. Child's sobs were quiet but wrenching. Ellie held her until she slept, her own tears slipping silently down her face. The hospital corridors were unnaturally quiet for the hour. Lakeside snow whispered against the windows. A softer echo of the storm Ellie had pushed through 2 nights before. Wren was sleeping in her room, legs swaddled in fresh plaster and propped on pillows. Ivy had finally stopped crying and was curled into a tight ball under her blanket. Ellie sat between their rooms in a plastic chair, too tense to rest, too wired to close her eyes. The detective's words kept circling back in her mind. We have. Enough to charge Rachel with first-degree murder and attempted murder? Enough to charge wasn't the same as enough to convict. Ellie had been in courtrooms before, testifying for rescue cases that turned to criminal trials. Evidence had a way of blurring under cross-examination. The jury could be swayed by tears, by a defense attorney's well-timed doubts. And Rachel had already proved she could lie with a straight face. By mid-morning, the hospital lobby was clogged with reporters. News had leaked as it always did, and the story was spreading fast. Murder in Glacier National Park. Missing father's wife arrested after survival ordeal. Trail camera breaks case in family's disappearance. Nurse intercepted. Ellie, as she returned from checking on Wren's chart. There's a man asking for you downstairs, she said. Says his name is Charles Henson. Claims he's an attorney. Lee frowned. I don't have a lawyer. The nurse hesitated. Said he's here to represent Rachel. The elevator ride down felt longer than any climb Ellie had made in the mountains. When the doors opened, she saw him, mid-50s, expensive. Suit, an expression that seemed carved from polished wood. Mrs. Whitaker, he said, extending a hand she didn't take. I'm here on behalf of my client, Rachel Whitaker. I advise you not to speak to the press or to law enforcement without counsel present. Anything you say could be used against you. Ellie stared at him. Against me? Your client tried to? Kill me. His expression didn't change. Allegedly. She tells a very different story. And right now, it's your word against hers. She turned away without answering. She'd learned long ago that some people weren't worth speaking to. That night, Ivy woke from a nightmare, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Ellie sat on the edge of her bed and stroked her hair until the shudders slowed. She told me not to tell, Ivy whispered. Ellie froze. Who, sweetheart? Mom, the word came out small and sharp. She said if I told anyone what happened to Daddy, something bad would happen to Wren. Ellie's hands stilled. Can you tell? Me now? Ivy hesitated, then nodded. They were fighting. Not yelling loud, but the angry kind. Daddy went outside. Mom followed him. I was supposed to stay in the cabin, but I wanted to see where they went. I saw her lip trembled. She pushed him. He fell. I heard him hit something. Then she came back and said we had to leave. The words were halting, but the truth in them was unmistakable. Ellie kept her voice steady. You did the right thing telling me. The next morning, she gave Ivy's statement to the detectives. They were grim-faced but clearly relieved. It was the missing link, an eyewitness. Account from someone who had no reason to lie, but good news didn't last long. That afternoon, while Ellie was in Wren's room helping her with lunch, a uniformed officer came to the door. Mrs. Whitaker, there's been a development, he said quietly. Rachel made bail. The words dropped like ice into Ellie's stomach. How? Bond. Posted by an anonymous party. She's under travel restrictions, but she's out until trial. Ellie looked at her granddaughters. Wren was focused on her applesauce. Ivy was coloring in a picture, her head bent low. Neither of them had any idea that the woman who had killed their father, and nearly them, was walking free somewhere in town. Ellie's mind was already moving. She'd spent decades in the wilderness. But the terrain she was about to cross was different. court dates, custody battles, media glare. And she knew Rachel wouldn't just fade quietly into the background. That evening, after the girls were asleep, Ellie sat in the hospital's dim family lounge with a paper cup of stale coffee. The TV in the corner was tuned to a local news station, the anchor's voice smooth and distant. Sources close to the investigation say there may be inconsistencies in the statements provided by key witnesses, including surviving family members. Ellie's stomach tightened. The narrative was shifting. Rachel's people were already planting seeds of doubt. Somewhere deep in the building, a door clicked. Footsteps approached. When she turned, a man she didn't recognize stood in the doorway, his coat dusted with snow. "You don't know me," he said softly, "but I knew your son, and I know what Rachel's capable of." Ellie didn't move from her chair. She studied the man in the doorway. Tall, lean, a weather-beaten face under a knit cap, and eyes that didn't quite meet hers. "I'm listening," she said finally. He stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind him. "Name's Nathan Cole. I worked with Daniel. Construction and project management out of Kalispell. We weren't close friends, but I respected him. And I know for a fact he wasn't cheating on Rachel, no matter what." She's saying. Ellie's brow furrowed. "How do you know?" "'Cause I was with him the night she claims he was meeting another woman." Nathan lowered his voice. "We were working late on a renovation job. Called her to say he'd be home after 9. She blew up, accused him of lying, of sneaking around. He laughed it off, said she'd been paranoid lately." Ellie folded her arms. "You didn't tell the police?" "Didn't think it mattered until I heard about what happened. But that's not the only thing." He glanced toward the hallway. "A month before your son went missing, Rachel came to see me. Said she wanted an estimate for a deck expansion." But the conversation, it got weird. She started asking me if I'd ever done work on mountain cabins, if I knew anyone who had one in a remote area. Ellie's stomach tightened. She was fishing for somewhere to hide. That's what it feels like now. Nathan took a step closer. "Listen, I know you've got people around you now, but she's out on bail. And if I've learned anything about Rachel Whitaker in the last year, it's that she doesn't forgive and she doesn't forget. You should be careful." Ellie didn't reply right away. She was turning his words over, weighing them. If Rachel had been planning this long before the hike, and Daniel's death wasn't a crime of passion, it was premeditated. And premeditated. Killers didn't stop just because they were facing trial. 2 nights later, it happened. Ellie had just finished reading 2 Ivy in the hospital room when she noticed a shadow past the door window. Not a nurse's quick stride, not the slow shuffle of an orderly. This was a pause, someone standing just out of view. Her instincts screamed. She rose and crossed to the door, yanking it open. The hallway was empty, but halfway to the elevator. The red glow of the exit sign caught on a figure slipping around the corner. A woman, hood up, moving fast. Ellie's first thought was Rachel. She almost gave chase, but then Ivy's voice came from behind her, trembling. "Grandma, someone was watching me through the window before you saw." Ellie shut the door and pulled the blinds. "We're fine, sweetheart," she said, but her voice was tighter than she meant it to be. The next morning, the detectives confirmed her fears. "We've reviewed the security footage," Detective Marshall told her in the conference room. "The woman in the hoodie wasn't Rachel, but she's connected. Name's Kelly Price, Rachel's cousin. She has a record for harassment and intimidation. We believe Rachel sent her." "To do what?" Ellie asked. "Could be to scare you, could be to talk to the girls, could be worse. Either way, we're getting a restraining order and posting officers at the doors." Ellie nodded, but it wasn't reassurance. She'd seen how fast someone with enough determination could slip past precautions. That night, while the hospital quieted and the hum of machines filled the rooms, Ellie sat by the window, staring out over the snowy parking lot. Headlights moved on the distant highway. Somewhere beyond those hills, Rachel was sitting in a warm house, free. And somewhere between here and there, lines were already being drawn, legal, emotional, maybe even physical. Ellie knew one thing for certain. Keeping the girls safe was no longer just about telling the truth in court. It was about anticipating Rachel's next move before she made it. The end of the week, the girls were discharged into Ellie's care. A court order granted her temporary guardianship until the criminal proceedings were over. It should have felt like a victory. Two small figures buckled into the back seat of her Subaru, both alive, both within arm's reach, but the relief was edged with unease. Ellie had spent most of her life trusting the wilderness to be dangerous and the towns to be safe. Now she was realizing the reverse could be true. Her house sat at the edge of a frozen meadow. It's a kind of place that in summer was all wildflowers and honeybees, but in winter was a wind-swept plain of ice. It was far enough from town to offer quiet, but close enough for a quick drive to the sheriff's office. She thought the balance might give the girls a sense of peace. That first night, Ivy slept in the same bed as Wren. Ellie left the bedroom door open, listening for every change in their breathing. At 2:47 a.m., she heard the creak. Not the harmless groan of the old floorboards, not the expansion of the walls in the cold. This was deliberate weight, slow and careful. Moving from the back porch toward the kitchen, Ellie reached for the heavy flashlight she kept by the bed. She moved silently, her years of backcountry, patrolling, sharpening her steps. The back door's deadbolt was still locked. But on the sill below the kitchen window, a fresh smear of snow had been brushed away, revealing a single, clear handprint. She stood in the dark, staring at it, until her breath fogged in the cold air leaking from the window frame. Whoever it was hadn't gotten inside or hadn't needed to. The next morning, she called Detective Marshall. Could be nothing, she said, but nothing is how bad things start. Marshall came himself. He examined the print, then the surrounding snow. It's smudged for a clean lift, he said, but we'll check the trail cams near your property. Ellie's jaw tightened. I don't have any. You do now, he said. I'll get a couple from the evidence locker. They're old, but they'll do the job. The footage arrived and the first clip made Ellie's skin crawl. It was the night of the handprint. The camera caught the shape of a person standing at the edge of the meadow for nearly 20 minutes, unmoving, before walking straight toward the house. The hood was up, face shadowed, but the height and build looked painfully familiar. Kelly Price, Marshall said, confirming her suspicion. Your cousin-in-law's not subtle. We'll bring her in, but Kelly was gone, her landlord said. She'd moved out suddenly, leaving behind 2 boxes of clothes and a freezer full of rotting food. That week, Rachel made her first real move in court. Her lawyer filed a petition to have the girls removed from Ellie's custody. Citing emotional instability and a history of volatile behavior, a smear job built on half-truths and outright lies. The hearing date was set for 3 weeks out. 3 weeks in which Rachel would be free to whisper to the press, to shape the public perception, to seed doubt in anyone who might end up on a jury. Ellie's attorney, a wiry man named Ben Yates, wasn't one for sugarcoating. They're going to drag you through the mud. We'll fight it, but you need to be ready. I've been ready since the moment I saw that camera footage, Ellie said, but readiness didn't stop the next surprise. On a gray Tuesday morning, the sheriff's office called. A snowshoer had found something in a frozen creek about 8 miles from where Daniel's body was believed to have fallen. Ellie was in the car before Marshall finished explaining. They met the recovery team at the site, a narrow stretch of ice where the creek funneled into a rocky gorge. The men had already pulled the object free. A small, dented metal box, its sides scuffed from tumbling through the current. Inside were papers, a flash drive in a waterproof case, and a worn leather wallet. Daniel's wallet. Ellie's hands shook as she flipped it open. His driver's license stared back at her. The cash was still inside. His wedding photo, too. Marshall carefully bagged everything. We'll check the drive if it's what I think it is. It could change everything. That night, Ellie couldn't sleep. The girls were safe in their room, but her mind kept circling back to that little metal box and why Daniel would have it on him. It wasn't until the call came from Marshall, his voice sharper than usual, that she got her answer. Ellie, he said, you'd better come down to the station. There's something on this drive you need to see. The station's conference room was dim, its blinds half closed against the pale winter light. Detective Marshall was already there when Ellie walked in, his laptop open, a pair of headphones draped across the keyboard. I've copied the files. From the flash drive, he said, motioning her toward a chair. There are 14 audio recordings, Dates show they were made over the course of 5 days, ending the day before Daniel disappeared. Ellie's throat felt tight. "Play them." The first recording crackled to life. Daniel's voice came through, hushed, like he'd been afraid someone might overhear. "If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident. Rachel's been talking about getting free of me. Not divorce, something worse. I don't know who she's working with, but she's been making calls asking about remote properties. She doesn't know I found her notebook. If I disappear, make sure someone looks there." Ellie gripped the table. She'd known Rachel was dangerous, but hearing her son say it in his own voice was a blow she wasn't prepared for. The next few recordings painted an even darker picture. Daniel described overhearing Rachel on the phone with Cal, confirming his connection before Cal had even admitted it. He spoke of seeing unfamiliar vehicles near their home, of feeling watched when he was alone. The last recording was the hardest to hear. "She asked me to take the girls up to the ridge with her, said she wanted a family hike before the weather turned. I told her no. She smiled and said, 'It'll be the last one we need to take, if this is my last entry. I take care of the girls, Mom. I love you.'" Ellie didn't realize she'd been holding her breath until the file ended. Marshall shut the laptop gently. "We'll be submitting these to the DA. They corroborate almost everything you've told us." "Almost," Ellie said. "Missing?" Marshall hesitated. "There's no direct evidence of the push. No footage, no other witnesses but Ivy. The defense will say Daniel was paranoid, maybe planning to leave Rachel, and he staged these recordings to make her look guilty." Ellie's jaw tightened. "Then we find the notebook." By the time she returned home, the media was already circling. 2 vans idled near the end of her driveway, their camera crews waiting for her to step out. Rachel's lawyer had gone on morning television claiming that Daniel's death was a tragic accident, that the so-called evidence was manufactured grief. From a mother unwilling to accept her son's reckless decisions in the wilderness, inside. The girls were in the living room building a blanket fort. Ivy peeked out. "Grandma, why? Are there people with big cameras outside?" Ellie forced a smile. "It's just noisy neighbors, sweetheart." But she knew the noise was only going to get louder. That night, while the girls slept, Ellie searched her son's old study. Most of his personal things were boxed up in storage, but she hoped he might have hidden something before the hike. Checked drawers, inside books. Even behind the radiator cover. Nothing. She was about to give up when she remembered the false bottom in his desk. Little trick he'd shown her years ago for keeping paperwork safe from nosy house guests. She pried it up, her breath catching. Inside was a single spiral-bound notebook. Half the pages were grocery lists, work notes, and doodles from the girls. But the last third stopped her cold. Dates, names, partial addresses, references to property. On Ridge Creek, Cal payment confirmed, and KP to handle cleanup if needed. She didn't need Marshall to tell her KP was Kelly Price. And one final note, written the night before the hike, bring first aid kit. Expect resistance. Ellie barely had time to process it before her phone buzzed. Marshall's voice was taut. "Ellie, you need to get the girls and leave the house. Now, we just intercepted chatter that Rachel's cousin might be headed your way, and she's not coming to talk this time." Ellie's eyes flicked to the dark windows, the expanse of snow beyond. Every instinct she had from decades in the field flared alive. She went straight to the girls' room. "Put on your coats and boots," she whispered. "We're going for a ride." The girls didn't ask questions. Maybe they saw something in Ellie's face. Maybe they'd learned far too young that sometimes survival meant moving before you understood why. Within 3 minutes, Ivy was zipped into her parka, Wren's. Cast wrapped in an old fleece, both of them bundled in scarves. Ellie grabbed the go-bag she'd kept by the back door since the hospital discharge. Blankets, water, a first aid kit, and the revolver she'd inherited from her father. Outside, the cold hit like a wall. Breath turned instantly to frost, and the snow underfoot groaned with each step. She ushered the girls into the Subaru, her eyes scanning the tree line, as she backed out of the driveway. The headlights swept across something a narrow set of tire tracks cutting fresh into the snow, stopping short about 50 yards from the house. No engine noise, no lights. She knew then whoever had come was already on foot. The road out was a winding two-lane, bordered by pines heavy with snow. Ellie kept her high beams off, relying on muscle memory and the faint gray glow of moonlight. She drove south toward the old fire road, route most people didn't know connected back to the main highway. 5 minutes in, Wren stirred. "Grandma, where are we going?" "Somewhere safe," Ellie said, her voice calm by force. Ivy's gaze was fixed on the rear window. "There's someone back there." Ellie glanced at the mirror. At first she saw only the darkness between. The trees then, a flicker of movement. A figure slipping along the shoulder of the road, keeping pace. Too close for comfort. At the fork, Ellie made a snap decision. Instead of taking the fire road all the way to town, she swung onto the old ranger trail barely wide enough for the Subaru. But with one advantage, she knew every dip and bend. And anyone following would have to guess. Half a mile in, she cut the lights and rolled to a stop in a shallow ravine. "Out," she whispered. "Quiet." The girls followed her to a stand of spruce where the snow was less deep. Ellie crouched, pulling an emergency blanket from the bag. "Stay here. Don't move until I come back. If you hear anything that's not me, hide under this." "Where are you going?" Ivy's voice cracked, to make sure we're not followed. Moved uphill, circling back toward the road. Her boots sank into the powder with a muffled huff. Her breath slow and controlled. Then she saw her, Kelly Price. Emerging from the shadows, hood down now, a length of metal pipe in one hand. Her eyes swept the road like a predator scanning for prey. Ellie stepped out from the trees, revolver raised. "Drop it." Kelly froze, then smirked. "You won't shoot me? You're too busy playing Grandma of the Year. I will if you take another step toward those girls." For a long moment neither moved. Then Kelly's gaze flicked left. And Ellie knew she was about to bolt. The shot rang out, hitting the snow 6 inches from Kelly's boot. She dropped the pipe instantly, hands lifting from behind them, headlights flared. A sheriff's SUV rolled up the road, tires crunching. ICE marshal got out, weapon drawn. Kelly Price on the ground now? Within minutes, Kelly was cuffed and in the back of the SUV, spitting curses that steamed in the cold air. As they drove back toward town, Marshall filled her in. "You think she was trying to scare you into dropping your custody fight?" "My gut says Rachel wanted her to do more than scare." Ellie's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Then your gut's probably right." That night, with the girls asleep in the sheriff's guest house, the safest place available until they found something more secure, Marshall told her something else. Kelly's phone had a string of messages from Rachel.
The last one
"Was sent less than an hour before we got your call. It just said, make sure she doesn't make it to court." Ellie didn't answer. She was looking out the window at the snow falling thick and silent, wondering how many more people Rachel still had working for her, and how far they were willing to go. The news broke before sunrise. Local station anchors sat stiff in their chairs. The headline crawling across the bottom of the screen: "Woman arrested after alleged attempt to intimidate key witness in Whitaker murder case." Rachel's attorney was already working damage control. He told reporters Kelly Price was a distant relative, with no involvement in the case whatsoever, and that her actions were misinterpreted. He painted Ellie as a paranoid grandmother, seeing enemies in every shadow. Ellie muted the TV. She'd seen this game before. Discredit the witness. Blur the truth. Grind it down until it's just another he said dash she dash said. The DA's office called mid-morning. Assistant District Attorney Lillian Crane's voice was brisk. "We're moving to expedite," Crane said. "With Kelly in custody, we can tie her directly to Rachel. That, combined with Daniel's recordings and the notebook, gives us enough for a pretrial motion to deny bail permanently." Ellie felt a flicker of hope. "And if the judge agrees, Rachel stays behind bars until the trial. It's the best way to keep you and the girls safe." 2 days later, they were in the courthouse, a squat brick building in the center of town, half surrounded by news vans. The girls stayed with a deputy in a private room upstairs while Ellie sat behind the DA's table. Rachel entered in cuffs, orange jumpsuit stark against her pale skin. Even now, she carried herself like she was walking into a dinner party, her chin high, eyes scanning the room until they landed on Ellie. The look she gave wasn't anger. It was something colder. Warning written in ice crane laid out the evidence. The recordings, the notebook, Kelly's messages. Every word built the picture Ellie already knew by heart that Daniel's death was no accident. And Rachel had planned to finish the job with his daughters. The defense countered with their own narrative. The recordings they claimed were selectively edited by a grieving mother. The notebook. A mishmash of unrelated notes and half-remembered conversations. Kelly Price. A troubled woman acting entirely on her own. When the judge finally spoke, the room went so quiet Ellie could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Bail is denied. The defendant will remain in custody pending trial. It should have been a turning point, and in some ways, it was. For the first time since the hike, Rachel wasn't free to move against them. But that night, as Ellie tucked the girls into bed at the sheriff's guest house, Ivy whispered, "Grandma, what if she gets out anyway?" Ellie smoothed her hair. "She won't. Not before we're ready." The next morning, Marshall showed up at the door with a folder. "This came in from the state lab," he said. "It's about the metal box you found." Inside was a printout of the flash drive's hidden partition files not visible during the first search. They were photographs. Grainy night vision shots of a cabin Ellie didn't recognize. Daniel in the doorway, face tense, holding the twins close. And in the background, through a window, the unmistakable outline of Rachel watching. "Where was this taken?" Lee asked. Marshall shook his head. "That's the problem. We don't know. And if this cabin's still out there, there might be more we haven't found." The cabin and the photographs became an obsession overnight. Ellie spread the printouts across the sheriff's conference table, studying every warped board, every knot in the wood siding. She'd spent decades in these mountains. She knew most of the old ranger huts, hunting shacks, and vacation cabins by sight, but this one was unfamiliar. "It's not on any of our property maps," Marshall confirmed. "If it's still standing, it's likely on unregistered land or deep enough, in that nobody bothers to track it. And then we start with what is in the photos," Ellie said. "That ridge in the background, I've seen it before." It took half an hour of poring over topographic maps, but she found it, a jagged slope north of Ridge Creek, accessible only by a faded logging road closed for winter. 2 days later, they set out in snowmobiles. Marshall rode point with 2 deputies, while Ellie followed with a small pack, water flares, and her revolver. The trail was half buried in drifts, the trees bending under the weight of new snow. After 2 hours, the road vanished entirely, forcing them to navigate by compass and instinct. When they crested the ridge, Ellie saw it. The cabin sat in a shallow clearing, its roof sagging, walls mottled with age. But the shape, the window placement, it was the same as in the photos. Inside, the air was stale with rot. Dust lay thick on the floorboards, but the center of the main room told a different story. Footprints, only partially filled by snow blown through a broken window. Ellie moved carefully. In the corner, a small cot was still made up, the blanket stiff with cold. Beside it sat a metal thermos, half full of water that hadn't yet frozen. Someone had been here recently. In the back room, she found a narrow desk with a drawer jammed shut. It took 3 tries, but she forced it open. Inside were maps hand-marked routes between the cabin, the ridge where Daniel died, and a third location she didn't recognize. Tucked between the maps was a photograph, the twins taken. From a distance, in the yard of Ellie's home, Marshall's voice was tight when she showed him. "Whoever's been using this place has been watching you. My guess, Rachel's people. Maybe even Rachel herself before her arrest." Ellie's eyes went to the third marked location. "We need to know what's there." They pushed on, following the coordinates through a narrow gorge. As the trail opened, they saw it. A half-collapsed mineshaft, ringed with snow. Inside the entrance, they found remnants of a camp, a tarp, empty food tins, and a single plastic storage bin. When Ellie pried it open, her breath caught. Inside were Daniel's missing belongings, his parka, his field journal, and a waterproof bag holding more of his recordings. That night, back at the sheriff's office, they listened. These new files were clearer, more urgent. Daniel spoke of discovering that Rachel wasn't working alone, that someone higher up was financing her plans. Someone with resources and a vested interest in keeping certain secrets buried. The last file ended mid-sentence, as if he'd been interrupted. Ellie sat back, her stomach twisting. If Rachel's just part of this, then whoever else is involved. They're still out there. Marshall nodded grimly. And they're not going to let this trial happen without a fight. The last week before the trial moved like a slow avalanche, steady, inevitable, dangerous. Marshall doubled the deputies on watch, rotating them every 6 hours. The girls stayed close, their laughter a fragile shield against the tension curling. Through every corner of the guest house, Ellie tried to rest. But her mind stayed on the voice in Daniel's final recordings. The urgency, the fear, and the shadow of this unnamed higher-up. Whoever it was hadn't shown their face yet. That, she knew, meant they were waiting for the perfect moment. It came 2 nights before jury selection. A storm had rolled in, blanketing the town in heavy snow. Most roads were near impassable, and the deputies on duty had been called to help. With a jackknifed plow on the main street, Ellie was alone with the girls when the power went out at first. She thought it was the storm. Then she saw the beam of a flashlight cutting across the snow outside the living room window. Her pulse jumped. She pulled the girls close, whispering, "Upstairs closet. Don't come out until I say the back door creaked," whoever it was knew. Where to step to avoid the loud boards? Ellie slid into the kitchen. Revolver in hand, every sense sharpened. A man stepped into the doorway, tall. Broad-shouldered, face half hidden under a balaclava. Not Rachel. Not Kelly. Someone new. He spotted her instantly. "Where's the notebook?" His voice was deep, measured the voice of someone used to giving orders. Ellie didn't answer. She aimed center mass. "Leave now, or you won't leave at all." He took a step forward. "You don't understand. The trial can't happen. Too many people go down if it does." The realization hit like cold water. This wasn't just about Rachel's jealousy or greed. This was bigger, and whoever he worked for had enough reach to send him into a blizzard to end it. From outside came the sudden wail of sirens, Marshall's SUV tearing up the icy road. The man swore, lunged, and Ellie fired. The shot hit his shoulder, spinning him into the counter. He bolted for the door, vanishing into the storm before the deputies made it inside. They never caught him. But his presence was enough to convince the judge to fast-track security for the trial and relocate Ellie and the girls to a safe house. On the second day of testimony, the recordings, notebook, and photos came into evidence. Rachel's composure cracked for the first time when the jury heard Daniel's voice naming her, warning his mother. It took them less than 4 hours to return a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Rachel was sentenced to life without parole. Kelly took a plea deal for conspiracy and intimidation. The man in the balaclava was never identified. But the DA's office quietly opened a separate investigation into possible accomplices. By spring, the snow was melting in the meadow around Ellie's home. The girls chased each other in the grass, their laughter no longer sounding forced. Ellie sat on the porch, the revolver locked away now, though never far. She knew some shadows lingered longer than others. That higher up was still out there somewhere, but for now, the girls were safe. And that, she thought, was enough to keep her watch just a little longer. The mountains would hold their secrets, but she would hold hers tighter.